Welcome to the seventh session of the Pre-Disruptive Innovation Days. So this covers the period from 1982 to 1983, when I had joined Citibank, and I was still a bachelor. Right? So that is the period that is covered this session. So it was just like a 1 year kind of period. So in the end of 1981 is when I joined Citibank, and I immediately went to Athens for a training course. Now, this was the first time that I had gone out of India. I had passed through a fairly tough time in Jamshedpur, with both personal and work issues. And I was recovering from that. Then I had to get a passport. This was my first foreign trip. So when I reached Athens, I was a little bit apprehensive, but I really liked the environment. I really liked the training. And I was at the top of my training class. And the director of the training center had very good things to say. So I was kind of got little bit noticed in the Citibank trainee circle, and the Citibank CEOs or country heads, they were sort of competing for talent, especially in Saudi. So Citibank had bought, I think, Saudi American Bank. So the CEO of Saudi American Bank, through the director, approached me on saying, would I like to join Saudi American Bank, which paid way, way better than Citibank in India, and tried to somewhat poach me. But Citibank India got wind of this, and they went into like protection mode, basically made sure that that offer was rescinded, that I didn't consider it, not that I was considering it actively. So it was just to show you how, there was a fair amount of competition even between the countries at Citibank to attract talent. And just though I was very new, but because I was doing so well in the training course, the country heads were also in touch with the training director and getting feedback. The other interesting thing that happened was that at that time, we used to get a daily allowance of dollars to cover our expenses. And earlier, this allowance was very low for people from India and higher for people from other places. But some of us sort of fought against this, and our per diem was raised. So we started getting quite a lot of dollars. And we were used to being quite conservative on our spending. So we ended up saving a fair amount of dollars. And then, like, whatever luggage we had, etc. So we enjoyed our 3-4 months in Athens, did a few trips here and there to the islands, to a place called Diakofto, which was where you took a train and went up into a very steep kind of area with all kinds of rocks. So some very interesting sightseeing that we did in Greece while we were there. But still, we had quite a lot of dollars left over. So after our course finished, I took a week off and decided to fly to New York and then back to India. So I had a week in New York, though it was the winter in the US. So this was my first trip to New York, and I got all my luggage sent back to India. So I just had a handbag with a few clothes because the idea was to do a lot of shopping in the US. Um, and so I reached US Customs and they asked me how long I was going to stay. And I said 7 days. And then they said, okay, have you got any checked in luggage? And I said, no. And that made them very suspicious because they thought maybe I was a drug dealer or something like that. So then they wanted to see my handbag, and then they found nothing suspicious, but they felt maybe there was this toothpaste tube which may have some drugs in it or something. I don't know what they found. So they said, okay, squeeze this tube. And so then they saw that there was toothpaste, and it was a brand called Signal, which had a red line in it. So the customs guy said, what is this? This thing has a red line in it. So I said, it's toothpaste. So he said, how do I know it's toothpaste? So I said, well, you can brush with it. So he said, are you acting smart? I said, well, if you don't want to brush with it, I will brush with it, whatever. But then he said, okay, do you have a card on you? So I had the Citibank card. So then he got convinced. He asked me whether I had money, and I had all these traveler's checks, which were a fairly large amount. So then he let me go. And then in New York, I stayed with one of my cousins who was pretty far off. And it was winter. And then I used to take the train from this place, Metro North, to go to the city, do a lot of shopping, leave the shopping in lockers, and then come back and then go out again. So I did this for the week. So I got a good idea of New York and New York winters, and did a lot of shopping, including the suitcases for keeping all that shopping, and came back to India. So the first job that I did in Citibank, so Citibank had a good system that all of the people, they mostly started in operations because that was the nuts and bolts of banking. So a lot of people do not realize that banking is very much like a factory, except that you don't have machines, you have computers, or you had, at that time, not even computers, but you had these huge record-keeping machines which maintained ledgers and things like that. And you had tickets which you used to write, and then based on that, the tickets were posted, and there was a whole industrial process at the back. So for people to kind of understand that, all the people who joined were put through operations. And this training that I'd done in Athens was also to tell us about operations, how frauds happen in banks. It was an excellent training. And I also realized how a very large company like Citibank can standardize its processes. So there was this manual, which was called the Accountings and Procedures Manual, which was A&P manual. And that had two sections, like a policy section, which any branch anywhere in the world on Citibank had to follow, unless a deviation to that policy section was approved by New York because of local conditions. And then there was a procedure section for each area, like how will you maintain the vault, how will you take deposits, how will you do letters of credit, and so on and so forth. And these procedure sections also had to be followed unless they were deviations to this were approved, and these could be approved at the country level by the country head and then reviewed by New York. So later on, when there were internal audits, they were done against this A&P manual. And the way this A&P manual had been developed was also very interesting, because over the many years, every single loss that Citibank had suffered anywhere across the world was sent to a unit in New York, which sort of collated all these and made changes to the manual. So the manual was based on real life things to see how the various processes had to be developed such that they provided controls, but also let the business run. So because of this time and operations and also a fairly good understanding of how this whole thing worked, then in my first job, I was able to actually turn around a department which had a lot of overtime, very low morale, and make it like one of the best departments where there were a couple of people who wanted to do overtime, and then most of the people, quite a few of the women, they just wanted to come in on time, finish their work on time, and leave. And earlier, because the work was not properly allocated, because things were not done properly, there was a lot of overtime, leading to very low morale with the people who didn't want to do overtime. So the thing was that it was also very important to get the big picture correct. So I was good at that. I was trying to understand what we were doing on bill discounting, how did the bank make money, how did they attract customers, how could we get more market share. So some of that thinking, which maybe a normal operations person wouldn't do, I would do, and that was appreciated a lot in Citibank. One other small story here is that when things were very manual, we had various checks and balances to see whether there were any errors which were there. And one of the things that we found was in one of these reconciliations that there was an error, and this reconcilement we did over 6 months. So the error was in favor of the bank. It was as if we had probably overcharged some customer, and the error was not a massive error, but it was still significant. So we could have decided to ignore the error and wait till a customer came and claimed it. We could have booked it into a suspense account and not taken it into profits. And we could have waited, for if the customer never claimed it, then we could have taken it into profits after a certain amount of time. But the operations head in the country at that time said, no, there is no way you're going to do this. You have to go back and look at every single bill that you discounted in the entire 6 months and find out where this error came. And so that was an extremely painful process. We used to come every weekend, go over every record, try and see how, and maybe after around 3-4 months, that is starting from the last reconcilement going on forward, we found the error and we were able to correct it. So while it was very painful, it also taught me a lot, this whole process of going through this pain and getting a detailed understanding of how things can go wrong. So because I did a fairly good job with this bill discounting, one of the things that was very unusual in my career with Citibank was that I was never transferred to another branch, and I always spent time at the head office, which was Mumbai. And I was sort of promoted to become a manager and moved to this area heading customer service. So I was given a full division, and I was the customer service division, which was essentially the division which handled the front office, the tellers in the bank, and taking of fixed deposits, maintaining the current accounts and savings accounts of people. So the division which did all that. So I was the person who was heading that. Now at that time, computers had just started coming, and there was a Japanese computer called Sword, which had some kind of a little language where you could write some programs. So I was quite fascinated by that and wrote some programs which helped do the manual accruals much faster. And that was really, again, quite appreciated. And I got this little bit of a reputation that I was pretty good at technology. So also in this area, sometimes we had like these VIP customers, or customers who had been there with the bank for many, many years and expected to be treated like VIPs every time they walked in. And one of them, like, because I was a little too process oriented and not that friendly with VIPs, one of them complained to the bank that they didn't get this treatment, and they wrote straight to the chairman in New York, and this became a presidential complaint. It was very interesting. I mean, it was finally resolved, and it was a little bit of a black mark on me because, I sort of initiated a presidential complaint. But it again showed me, how serious Citibank was about customer service. And then there were some programs around training and stuff like that. So again, Citibank was a very good organization where you went through a lot of training and sort of rounded off your rough edges. Another area that I had to deal with was that at that point in time, there were a lot of hippies, who used to come to India, and some of them would have traveler's checks and things like that, or they would try and get money wired from their parents to to Citibank, and then they'd want to collect it, from Citibank. So these people would create a lot of chaos in our branch. And one of the things that we did was we ended up creating a desk for them so that they could immediately inquire and they knew exactly where to go so they won't make a rush. And then we would tell them, look, there's nothing here or whatever. So we managed to isolate them from our main operations. Also, I got exposed to how to deal with difficult employees. So there was one particular employee in this area who was not very good and had been kept being overlooked for promotions within the clerical ranks because that person was not very good. And he, saw that, like I was very, very young compared to the previous customer service head, who was sort of grizzled veteran. And he thought that maybe, if he sort of does some emotional blackmail on me, it might work. So when I was doing his appraisal, he told me, look, I've been trying to do this for years and I'm not being successful. And I'm like really depressed. And if you do not promote me, I'm going to commit suicide. Now, at that particular point in time, I sort of told him that, well, that's your personal decision, but look, I can't deviate here. So now in hindsight, that was a terrible thing to do. Fortunately, he didn't commit suicide. He was just trying to do some emotional blackmail here. But it just shows how, in some ways, I was not very sensitive to certain issues that I probably should have been in the earliest stage of my career. So, of course, like the people in Citibank, we were very eligible bachelors, and we were staying in the Citibank Chamri. And some of the people, especially parents of girls from South India, would show a lot of initiative to try and get in touch with these people from South India who were in Citibank. and who were bachelors, into trying to meet them, trying to convince them that they should at least meet their daughters and stuff like that. So anyway, so this was all going on. My parents were also quite keen, for whatever reason, to try and get me married. And so one of the things that they did after my engagement had broken off, and they decided that it was no longer imperative that I marry a Bhargav, is that my father talked to his friend, who was Anita's father, and said that would it makes sense for Sanjay and Anita to meet. And then I think both the parents talked to us individually. And I basically said that, yeah, it's okay, but I don't think I'm ready to be married. I don't want to meet girls and all that. But if you say, or whatever, then it's okay. But I can't go to Delhi. She'll have to come to Bombay, and so on and so forth. And I think Anita's parents talked to her, and she also was like, whatever, like, but they, her parents managed to convince her to come to Bombay, and then we met in Bombay. And I think first we went out to see a movie, and then we went out for dinner. And I spoke, but Anita hardly spoke. But generally, I think we probably liked each other, so we decided to meet again. And then we decided to get engaged. But before we got engaged, we went through quite a few things. So I was very careful that whoever I got engaged to, I wouldn't go through another sort of painful process. So I had this yellow pad with a lot of questions, maybe about 47 questions, which I wanted to go over with Anita. She was quite patient, and she went through, then asked her that, do you have any questions? And she said no. And while we were in one of these meetings, we were at the gym. So one of the senior persons at Citibank, called Nanu Pamnani, saw us, and he also was quite inquisitive on this whole process. And also I called over one of my bhabis, Sheila Bhabhi from Pune, to meet Anita and give her views and all that. But I think finally, after about 10, 15 days of this whole process, both of us said, yeah, look, it looks like we are made for each other. And I was very happy, kind of over the moon. And so that's how we got engaged. And then our engagement was fairly short and sweet, because in 6 months, in the beginning of 1983, we were married. So I did visit Delhi occasionally on work and wrote to Anita quite often. And Rajiv, Anita's younger brother, sort of used to intercept these letters and blackmail her to get some money to get those letters. While we were there, we met, and I think there was one incident where we went for a movie and someone sort of touched Anita inappropriately, and Anita kind of slapped him, and I think that's all that I can remember during that period, which was interesting. So thanks for listening to me, and the story will continue in the next session.